All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Welcome to the live stream of the Adult in the Room podcast. Today, I have lots of things to talk about with you, and we've got some sober words on the Charlotte, North Carolina stabbing death of that Ukrainian woman. And in addition to that, how some of these stories that just aren't the story according to the mainstream news media proliferate in our news media stream and the consciousness of the country. And so that's a pretty heady idea for what we're going to talk about, but you'll get it. Yeah, obviously you will, because you're smart people. And then coming up on my interview with Don Bentley, he is the latest Vince Flynn universe author, and he's really a good writer. Just amazing. And I've always loved the Vince Flynn books. Those are spy thrillers. His last one was Capture or Kill, and because they're spy thrillers, and so they're, break things and kill people kind of things. And then the latest one is Denied Access, and this goes back into the annals of the origin story of the Mitch Rapp character. Mitch Rapp lives, and Mitch Rapp is, of course, the protagonist, and it goes back to the origin story. It fills out the troika of stories that tell us about the background of this guy, this character so beloved by Vince Flynn author fans. So start with American Assassin and go forward. So if you're new to the Vince Flynn universe. But, meantime, we've got lots to talk about today. The situation in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the light rail stabbing. You've undoubtedly seen what happened there, and I'll show you some of the information I believe you need to know. And the left has been ignoring it, or if they've now started reporting on it, these mainstream media news outlets, what they are saying about it is, we're afraid that the other people are pouncing and it's going to turn into a story about racism, because they're turning it into a story about racism. And why do we have that? Well, it's because the person who committed the murder on video, you can see it. It was recorded in live time, and it's CTV video. So you see the guy, you see what he did, and you see the victim. Boom, boom, boom. He guilty. And the victim is white. And so that is what we're here about today. And it's a tragic irony. And indeed, this whole story is, that a woman who comes to the United States as a legitimate, not fake refugee, we're opening the doors for everybody in the world to come. This is a legit person who needs to be given refugee status, and did. She's working, and she gets on the light rail and thinks she's in the United States of America, in a peaceful state in the United States of America. She comes to the United States to get away from the Ukrainian war by the Russians, and then she dies in a city at 10 o'clock at night in the United States. There's just something fundamentally wrong. Tragic irony does not even begin to cover the horror of this situation. So it was evil, it was tragic, maniacal, and senseless. Absolutely. And there's much to say about this. The crime of opportunity, which it clearly was. But let's get rid of the elephant in the room at the top so we can deal with the other things that have come out since we first learned of this horrible killing, this tragic loss of life on a light rail train at 10 o'clock at night in a very safe city, we thought. And that is that the newly resurfacing information that this obvious crime of opportunity, which it was racially based, or at least had racial overtones. And the reason that we know that, and I say it's advised because there are claims that an enhanced audio of the CCTV video on the Transit Authority CCTV show that the killer, whom we can see stabbing the woman in the neck, not on this show, you're not going to see the actual act, but you'll see enough. He says, as he leaves the scene of the crime, walks through the trains, says, I got that white girl, got that white girl. Now, clearly the man's, he's taken leave of his senses. He's mentally ill. I mean, some of us have mentally ill people in our families and friends groups and in our circle of people. But have they ever? No, they've never done that. And if you ever did, you'd want to do what this guy's mom did and call the police and tell them to please arrest him before he did this. So I say that we should take this new information about I did that white girl, I got that white girl, just advisedly, because it starts on social media. I don't always believe social media, okay? I don't. The Blaze is using it. I'm sure over at PJ Media, somebody's reporting on it. But I'd like somebody to take a look and go to the Charlotte Transit Authority or whatever the name of their transit people are and get some verification for this. And why they did not include that initially is, well, that's problematic for me. It's problematic. And since the video came out right before the weekend, 2 weeks after the incident happened, so it's a red flag for some people. I have to say that getting CCTV out of transit authorities, and I've tried before with records requests and that sort of thing, they take a long time to get that stuff to you. But the thing is that this was a murder. This was a murder. This wasn't some guy getting jacked or whatever. This is some lady getting hit. This was somebody being murdered. So it should have been under the most extreme timeline. They should have gotten this thing out very, very quickly. They failed to do that. It took 2 weeks to get it there. And then the media ignored whatever. I mean, for example, there are press releases in the universe that have, oh, and by the way, someone got murdered on the Charlotte light rail. And if you're in the media, if you do a beat check, what's what we used to call it, that's when you check around. Now everybody does it online. Wait, fine. Whatever way you want to do it, do your beat check and check. I mean, that should make the news. A murder on the trains they keep telling you are just super safe and that you should use instead of your car. But they don't. So it took a long time. So that's a red flag for me. I understand on some level because I've tried to chase these stories down before. But okay. This should have been news day one. Day one news. Oh, somebody's been murdered on that. Well, we can't tell anybody. That would be bad. So then it comes out. It's out on social media. Somebody puts it out there. Excuse me, I get some water. It gets out there on social media. And then the mainstreams ignore it again. And the only times they choose to get involved in the story or tell the story at all, most of them are still ignoring it, is to say, well, the right has responded in some very, very terrible ways. So we'll go through that today. This is why we call it when the story isn't really the story, the corruption files. So immediately the mainstreams go to guns. They claim that this has nothing to do with the failures of a leftist-run city. I mean, you people are crazy over there on the right. How dare you say that this is anything that is an institutional problem in the city and the state of North Carolina? The failure to lock them up, but everything to do with, well, we don't know, but we're sure everything that you say is racist. That's what Brian Stelter said on CNN. I mean, yeah, no, that didn't make sense. Don't try to make sense out of my last sentence. It didn't make sense when Brian Stelter said it. Okay, so let's go to the video now. And what you're gonna hear is the person talking about the bad guy who's been arrested 14 times, talking about, I got that white girl. I got that white girl. She said, if she can find it. Here we go. Let's watch it. Here's the incident at this area here. Crime of opportunity. He unfolds his knife, stabs her in the neck multiple times. Then he starts walking around, and he's dripping blood everywhere. And it sounds like I got that white girl. I got that white girl. That's what it sounds like. Maybe, you know, what is suggestible, right? If you think he's saying it, man, definitely he's saying white girl. And definitely she's a white girl. And she's gorgeous and everything, but she didn't look like she was somebody's fool on that train. But a couple of things here. And what I want to tell you, let's listen to him again before we go to the other couple of things. So look at this guy. Okay, he's supposedly homeless, and his mother kicked him out because dude's been arrested 14 times. I have his mugshot somewhere, but for whatever reason, I don't have it right this moment. And so there are 14 different mugshots of him, and there are 700 people in that county, Wake County, that have been arrested as many as 14 times, and they've been released. There is a problem in Wake County. Now, people have seized upon this on my side of the political aisle. And part of the reason is because when you have laws that treat criminals like pets, you get problems like this. This guy should not have been on the street. This guy should not have been in the light rail. He should have been locked up somewhere. His mother wanted him locked up in a mental institution. One can well understand why that happened, that she pleaded with the authorities because he had beaten up his sister, her daughter. And so she wanted this guy out. He was dangerous. He is violent. But I want you to notice a couple of things. Okay, I'm just going to sort of back. Here we go. So our killer here is walking through talking about, I got that white girl, or words to that effect. Then he takes off his hoodie because he's not stupid. He's not stupid. It is covered in blood, I suspect. It's got some blood evidence on it. He takes it off. So to the extent that he's insane, he's not dumb. Okay, he's not that dumb. He's not reckless. He's taking off the clothing that he was wearing at the time, and maybe, just maybe, if he changes his clothes, he will not be picked up by the police for having just murdered someone by stabbing her in the neck, which everybody knows you're done. I mean, there's no getting around that. Unless you're in the hospital and someone stabs you, there's probably not much anybody can do about it. But I also want you to see the rest of him here. Look, he's not underfed. He's got nice clothes on. Those are nice shoes. He's got a nice leather belt on. What is that? Does he have I'm just wondering what he's got in his back. If he's got like a weapon back there. Just checking. I don't know. But let me tell you something about his hair. That's $1,000 hairdo. Unless he's got some idiot woman braiding his hair for free for him and buying all the stuff for him. I mean, that's pretty nice. So he's not bereft. This guy's got a lot going for him. He's well fed. He's got a muscular stature. So he either goes to the gym or works out in some form or fashion. Maybe it's when he's been, I was going to say in jail, but you know what? He never stays there for very long. And so let's watch it one more time before we go over to our CNN soundbite of this panel talking about this issue when the story isn't the story. Okay, I got that white girl. I got that. That's what we believe he is saying. Okay, that's what we believe is saying that. Don't know. Could be somebody else on that train. We really don't know, but it probably is him. Okay, it probably is him. And so here's the problem that CNN is all concerned about. And it's just how stupid this situation is. Look, the dumb foolery, stupidity, dumbassery involved here is breathtaking. Enjoy it.
Certain people have been looking for an opportunity to find a case like this, to make a point like this. I want to play, this is Charlie Kirk, why he says this hasn't gotten a lot of attention.
A white Ukrainian refugee was murdered just because she was white. Everybody knows that, obviously. If a random white person simply walked up to and stabbed a nice, law-abiding black person for no reason, it would be an apocalyptically huge national story used to impose national sweeping political changes on the whole country. Instead, Megan Basham, no one seems to care when a white woman gets stabbed to the death.
Wow. He said white a lot.
Well, we are talking.
He said white a lot.
So I guess I don't think that's fair. Look, being in the system, because I have represented people who are mentally ill, and here's the balance. The balance is taking away people's freedom versus evaluating their mental illness. And New York City, there are a lot of programs.
Now, this didn't happen in New York City, but that's with the city with which he's most familiar. Okay, so as you can tell from his accent. So so Charlie Kirk is immediately seizing upon it as a white, black on white crime. And usually white women, if they're missing in some form or fashion, are usually given a lot of attention. So I'm not sure where Charlie's going there. And actually, I believe he had not seen this video that we just showed you of him saying that this was, I got that white girl, because it only broke yesterday afternoon. And I believe he'd already been on the air at that point and didn't have that information. But be that as it may, of course, naturally, the communist, the standby communist, who's been on staff and was a part of the Obama administration, the green jobs czar, has to weigh in, and so cue Black Commie.
For people who are mentally ill, but they have to want to be there.
And it's
about forcing them to be there.
When you are
He's
mentally
coming.
ill, you have a hard time knowing that you are mentally ill. But also, I mean, people like
He's a
Charlie
killer.
Kirk fan, they've been looking for opportunities to make this some sort of like reciprocal George Floyd situation. And that's the part that I think he's almost giving away the game. And it's sad to see a lot of people going along with it.
It's because it could very well be a racially motivated crime. So I think giving away the game is hardly something that I believe is going on here by the right. It's in all likelihood being seized on. CNN actually is giving away the game by reacting this way. Oh, we're so afraid. It's like when somebody, when an Islamist, a nutter jihadi guy or gal for that matter, blows something up. And then the very first thing in my inbox is a press release from CARE saying Islamophobic people are blaming Islam for this Islamic nutter doing this horrible deed. Same thing here. I mean, how dare they blame someone who's of a different color? Honey, just hold your fire. Hold your fire. Here's Van Jones.
A couple of things. One is, what happened to that young woman was...
Van Jones would like to say a couple of things. Van, would you like to say a couple of things? And Van Jones would like to say a couple of things, a couple of really stupid things. Go ahead, Van. You're making all the money. Just go. We are just loving on you.
Horrible. And it's everybody's nightmare.
Is it?
In any public space, a subway, whatever, that something bad's going to happen to you or somebody you care about. So it does strike a chord. We don't know why that man did what he did. And for Charlie Kirk to say, we know he did it because she's white, when there's no evidence of that, it's just pure race mongering, hate mongering. Mm-hmm. It's wrong. Then he says that if something like that had happened the other way, there would be sweeping changes imposed on society. Where is the George Floyd Policing Act? It didn't pass.
It didn't pass because it was stupid. Let's go. Charlie Kirk responds. Now, usually I don't just go do the tit for tat thing. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because it's going to give us entree to our next topic, which is why the right seizes on this kind of information and tries to debunk it right away. And it's why the left here, as seen in our buddies here on the CNN panel, try to deny that it is what the story is. A black man went after a white girl. Now, and then subsequently, and I look forward to finding out the extent to which that CCTV enhanced sound can be verified before we say, oh yeah, this could have been a racially motivated crime. Blonde girl sitting in front of him. And there's all kinds of things to say about that, which we will, believe me. But so you can see the dynamics at work here. When the story isn't really the story. The story, of course, is that this monster was allowed to get out of prison, or jail rather, at 14 times. And there's no bail. There's no bail. That's why what Van Jones says next is even stupider.
Pass. Even when you had a white police officer murder a black man on live television, the whole world saw, there were no sweeping changes. In fact, not one law has passed at the federal
Why
level.
is that?
So I think that's an important thing to point out. The other thing is, you mentioned the thing about cashless bail. I think this is a big challenge that we have. Would you have felt better if there had been cash bail and the mom had come and put down $1,000 to let him out?
Yeah. Okay, Van. Yeah, you're fired. And you're fired. His mom wanted him locked up. And that information was out at the time that Van Jones had done his CNN panel. And so there could have been things that were in the ether, but perhaps was not known to either party. Okay, just let us admit that might be the case. But we all know the proclivities of the media, and we all know the proclivities of the left-leaning CNN and MSNBCs. We know, and I'll show you why in a couple of minutes. So Charlie Kirk, people are writing stories. Charlie Kirk, he tells everybody what a wonderful thing person he is and how right he is, and indeed, So here we go. So Charlie Kirk says, Van Jones, I'm not ashamed, but you should be. You're the part of the very media cabal that tried to silence this story because it exposes the gross incompetence of Democrats' so-called criminal justice reform. And yes, of course, if the races were reversed, you'd be the loudest voice crying racism, Mr. White Lash. Remember when he said white lash was the result of Donald Trump being elected? He called it white lash. And of course, obviously, racializing the election when record numbers of Black people and Hispanic people were voting for Donald Trump. Anyway, I'm just going to have a little cup of water here. I don't get anything from this, but it does say, I'm voting for the guy they keep trying to kill. So misinformation, bad acts, attempts to make the story not the story, and change what the story is. These things all work together to say that they create a mosaic of a picture of people who are misinforming those, and all of a sudden Trump turns into Hitler, Pol Pot. It's ridiculous. We all know. I mean, we all do. And if you don't know, then now you do. So that brings us to one other tranche of information I'd like to bring up. And I could not help but notice this poor girl, this 23-year-old woman from Ukraine, who came as a refugee to escape the Ukrainian war that is being prosecuted by the Russians, to come to this city. She gets a job. She's working nights. She gets up, gets her clothes on. She's got her uniform on. She's got her glasses on. She's got a hat. She does not look particularly attractive, which is smart if you're going to be on the light rail at 10 o'clock at night. Which is my first thing. Don't get on the light rail at 10 o'clock at night. Try to share an Uber with somebody if you can. The reason I say that is because I'm not sure those Uber drivers are any better, but they might be. At least there's not going to be, when he's driving, he's not going to be able to stab you in the neck. Don't sit in front of somebody. Sit with your back against the wall. Of course. Bring something to fight back with. a taser, bear spray, something, a metal object that, if stuffed in someone's nether regions, may prohibit them from fathering children in the future. Do something. But she had her headphones on. She was watching her phone. She had no situational awareness. And she put herself in that spot. That's why I call it, it clearly is a crime of opportunity. He didn't, he wasn't just there to create problems necessarily. Well, he was there to create problems, but what I'm saying is he did it and she was right there. Hey, this is a white chick right here. I guess a white chick has something for him. And so that's bad. It's really bad. And women, your phones are not force field. They will not defend you. Yes, maybe getting a picture before he kills you might be helpful. Are you going to live stream it? I'm just curious because your phone's not going to help. You got to be defensive and be ready. So now I say all of this because of another death which occurred in a place not too awfully far from North Carolina over the weekend, actually. And it was the death of this guy.
Man felt that shot. He turned around and he put his hands in the air and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn and he fired several more shots.
Okay, so that was Dorian Johnson, that guy. Dorian Johnson, he's the guy who started the lie about, he put his hands up and said, don't shoot, or hands up, don't shoot. It became a rallying cry in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. And the reason it's important is because that happened and people were angry because they thought, oh, a police officer shot Michael Brown in cold blood in the middle of the street. How dare he, with his back turned, and then he got turned around and then he put his hands up, don't shoot, which did not happen. Did not happen. And the reason it's important is because there is a message conveyed. And the message is this: people who will lie about this will get that into the media mainstream. It will be repeated on the street. And all of a sudden, it is a narrative. And all of a sudden, police are terrible and they hate black men. They go out looking to hunt black men every single day. That's what they say. And that caught hold. That caught hold. And all of a sudden, speaking of CNN, we had people, hands up, don't shoot. Friend of Michael Brown helped spark hands up, don't shoot. Chant. They dismiss that this is a mere chant instead of a libel. Dies after being shot in Ferguson. So Dorian Johnson dies after being shot in Ferguson, Missouri, 1 mile away from where he started that lie about hands up, don't shoot. Here they are in Congress. Here they are, the St. Louis Rams. Here they are at a school. And we even have them on the CNN panel. Of course we do. Of course we do. This guy lied, and multiple dozens of officers were hurt. They've been murdered. Remember now, there were cold-blooded assassinations of police officers after Dorian Johnson lied through his...
Man felt that shot. He turned around and he put his hands in the air and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn and he fired several more shots.
Okay, so the 6 shots were fired. So, good on you for getting close, buddy. I mean, but you lied about everything else. Okay, so Trayvon Martin Michael Brown were all both shootings of self-defense on the part of the person they were tracking and beating at the time and fighting over the weapon. And as a result of the narrative, the Ben Crumps, the Reverend Al, all those guys literally lying about those two cases, lying to the American people about those two cases and to the Black community. What we ended up with was crippling legislation. We had memorandums of understanding on police forces that prevented them from doing their normal jobs. And, they had to go through all sorts of hoops. That's the Obama administration. This is very interesting and it's important. Some people are saying, I cannot believe that President Trump is going to the universities and demanding memos of understanding to stop the blood libel of Jews at the university level. How dare he do that and interfere with the collegiate atmosphere here? Well, I have my own concerns with that, but a memo of understanding ain't it. That's not the one I'm concerned with. But they did this at the Obama administration, go through all the police. Portland still has a memorandum of understanding going on with the Obama DOJ. They continue. They're, another layer of police commissions, another layer of people who decide what is allowable during riots and that sort of thing. Well, this did start a riot. Sure did. And who came in flying into Ferguson, Missouri? It was the Black Lives Matter, which had formed after Trayvon Martin. If I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. Can you imagine if Donald Trump had said, if I had a daughter, she would look like the victim of this case? I can only imagine how people's hair on fire would be. Be that as it may, there were memos of understanding. There were riots, and Lisa Fithian flies in and her flying monkeys. The BLM, you know what I'm saying? Lisa Fithian is like the progenitor of a lot of this. She works for the NGOs that create these riots, protests. She's the one who trains them. She tells them what to do. She comes into Missouri, and all of a sudden, Missouri's on fire. And so we've learned that. And that's why you get in front of this right away. It is why that when President Trump went to LA, and on June 7th of this year, there were riots, he brought in the feds right away. Oh, there's the ICE is here. We have to riot and we have to throw things off freeway overpasses onto police officers and CHP officers. We must do that. It is our mission. We must do that. Stop ICE. Stop ICE. Karen Bass was all over it. It was the same people who put on a riot for you, financing this thing, who are also getting money from the fire aid fund. I mean, you cannot frickin' make this up. I'm combining stories. Maybe I've got to do a fire aid update. But here's the thing. Got to get in front of it. Had he not sent in the National Guard and the U.S. Marines to protect ICE headquarters and to protect ICE officers as they went out and did busts, we would have had a riot and social unrest of unknowable proportions all over this issue. He did the right thing. He did save the city. Karen Bass wanted it to burn, and it didn't. And she's pissed. Okay? She's really upset about it. So, from the real politic to the fanciful, the storytelling aspect of it, I bring you my interview, part one of my interview with Don Bentley, who's just written another book in the Vince Flynn universe, Denied Access. He did such a great job on this book. Just a fabulous job. I spoke with him earlier, and here is the beginning of our talk. And here we are on the Adult in the Room podcast. How you doing? Victoria Taft here. Don Bentley over there. And let me give Don Bentley an introduction I think he deserves because it's his second novel in the Vince Flynn universe of books. And I want to make sure it's a good one, okay? Apache helicopter pilot in Afghanistan, FBI special agent, SWAT officer, best-selling author. Don Bentley has been the best-selling author in the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan Jr. universe, Don's own excellent novels in his Matt Drake series of books. And now he delivers his second offering in the Vince Flynn universe with his latest Mitch Rapp spy thriller. Take a look at it. Denied access. Pretty neat. I'm not done yet, though. The former SEAL team member, wildly successful author and podcaster on one of my favorite podcasts, Danger Close, Jack Carr, said of our guest today. Don Bentley is a former U.S. Army Apache helicopter pilot who flew QRF in support of Operation Red Wings in Afghanistan. Launching with only a frequency, call sign, and last known location of the four-man SEAL reconnaissance element, Don and the QRF flew into harm's way. One helicopter and 16 warriors aboard did not make it home. Not only does Don Bentley bring emotion and an emotional, I think, intelligence to his writing, he, of course, is an incredible writer in general. He brings his best experience and raw emotion in his writing. And read Forgotten War if you doubt me. And he brings his flying prowess to bear in his first Vince Flynn offering, Capture or Kill, about Mitch Rapp's role in the lead up to the bin Laden raid. So with this second offering in the Mitch Rapp series, Bentley sees an opportunity, a gap in the Mitch Rapp origin story. And he provides a bookend to American Assassin and Killshot in his latest novel, Denied Access. It's so doing. I think it might be the Celsius I've been drinking. Good God. In doing so, he completes the Mitch Rapp origin trilogy in a firm, sure-footed way. Don Bentley, welcome back to the Adult in the Room podcast. How are you?
I'm doing good, Victoria. Thanks for having me. Every time you do my introduction, I'm like, I don't know if I can live up to that. Like
I stumble over it.
I don't know, Victoria.
I started getting choked up. Honestly, when I read that Jack Carr part, I thought, oh, geez, I might lose it. Actually, do you just want to lose it every time you hear about that? And you
it's
reflect
still
back.
Really, I've gotten so it's crazy to think it's now been 20 years. This last June was the 20-year anniversary, and I've gotten to where I can talk about it in broad strokes and be detached from it. But whenever I dive into the details, it's still really, really hard. And it's funny with things like that. My front seater during that operation was a guy I flew with a lot in some ways he could be Mitch Rapp. He was from the East Coast and went to college on a lacrosse scholarship, which at the time I was from Ohio and had no idea what lacrosse was. And I'm like, what is this sissy sport you're talking about? Yeah. And after Afghanistan, he actually left Army Aviation, became a Green Beret, and then was a Green Beret team leader. And so he and I still text back and forth, especially every June 28th. And most of the time it's good. But, this last time, for whatever reason, he had texted me some research that he had done on it, and it kind of takes you back at weird moments when you think it's done. And I told my wife, I'm like, it's good, it's on the shelf, it's in a box, it won't come out. And she's like, I don't know about that. So yeah,
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know about that either. What did he find out about the lone survivor mission and the flight to find these guys?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily. It's funny because you spend a lot of time, especially after 20 years, going back over your memories and saying, did this happen? Did I just remember it this way? Was it different? What do you remember? And so he had actually gone through and plotted GPS coordinates of where the actual shoot down was, where we ran into trouble, where the original grid coordinates were, and then some other things that he had the opportunity to view. We had, as you did in most combat missions, our gun tape was running at the time. And so you can I've never seen it. I guess I take that back. I've never seen it since shortly after that first day when we turned it in and we're
Yeah.
answering questions and stuff about it. And so he had actually had an opportunity to go through and look at it again and said, "Hey, I can talk you through some of this stuff." And at first I thought that was a good idea. And then on further reflection, I'm not quite sure it is. And so it's kind of funny. It's like that itch that you want to pick at, but at the same time, you're like, maybe it's better to leave that thing alone. So
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand why, but it brings the humanity to your novels. Okay.
yeah, it definitely. I think and I apologize. I think we probably covered this ground in earlier interviews,
Yeah,
but
probably. But
I
okay.
wrote 3 books that didn't sell before I wrote my debut, Without Sanction. And I think part of the reason why it sold and the others didn't is because it was the first time I was willing to put kind of some of that vulnerability in there. Some of the things,
Yeah.
for me, it was in the mountains of Afghanistan in June 28, 2005 of practicing your entire life for this moment in time. And then it goes sideways and you can't get that back again. And what do you do? And so I try and bring that to the books I write now, because not just my time in Afghanistan. I've been very fortunate to call a lot of folks who could be Mitch Rapp friends, and just to hear their stories and hear how sometimes it goes right and sometimes it goes wrong. And even when it goes right, you don't ever walk away the same as when you walked into that. And so those men, and in some cases women, carry that with them, right? And so I think part of what I try to bring to my novels is that human element of it, the notion that there are stakes beyond what you see, or potentially certainly what you see in the action version of the movie. And so hopefully that brings some veracity to what I write.
Yeah. You say in a turn of phrase that I wrote down because I really liked it. I circled it in the book. Denied access. Kind of metaphysical itch he couldn't scratch. Is that what you're talking about here?
Yeah, I think that's it. You you have that thing that you want to go back to, or you, for me, for the Red Wings thing, a new podcast will drop and I'll listen to a guy and I'm like, no, that wasn't quite right. And you're like, do I go back and revisit it? Does it matter? Does it not matter? There's a journalist that is reached out to me several times over the last 20 years and did again this time. And he said, "Hey, I'm really going to write the article now. It's 20 years in." And I don't believe he still had, but he's like, "Who else can you put me in contact with?" And again, and so then you start thinking about it again and wanting to know, because even when you're a part of something that you see just your little view of it, right? Like your tiny little slice of it. And so on one side, you're very curious about what else happened and what you didn't know. And then on the other side, you think, there's no amount of reflection or no amount of revisiting it that's going to make it turn out any different than it did. And so, how much of it is, healthy or closure, and how much of it, again, is you're just picking at that itch that's never going to go away.
Yeah. In the meantime, you have to go with what it gives you, what the experience gives you. We lost our daughter when she was 2 to chicken pox. And, I can't go back and get her. I wish I could, but it made me a much more empathetic person.
Yeah.
I was able to, literally thank God, I was able to use that experience to reach out to more people, to use it for the good.
Yeah.
And that's all we can do with it, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much, right?
100%. And I think that for me, when I got out of the Army, I went through a pretty rough time for about 3 years, because I had transitioned out of the military, went to what I thought was going to be my forever job, moved back to my hometown. My wife and I were sweethearts, got the great house, had the job, lived with the family, and everybody was happy except for me. And I couldn't figure out, like, why can I not just be happy? Why is there something inside of me that feels like this isn't enough, or it's not fulfilling enough? And so part of that certainly was dealing, for the first time, having the time to deal with what happened in Afghanistan. But at the same point, what you don't realize when you leave the military is that you're cutting yourself off from the only community of people who have that shared experience, who understand what you went through and could kind of talk into it. And so for me, that closure, I guess, didn't happen until much later when I left that job and went to the FBI, and then actually went to another job for a small company that was founded by veterans, and many of the veterans in that company had stories similar to mine. And so, I remember one of them just listening to me, and at the end, he just looked at me and he said, "It wasn't your fault." And so there's nothing super profound in that, nothing that my wife hadn't told me, nothing that but because he had lived that guy's Nate Self, and he was the Ranger QRF leader in Takurgar, who was trying to go get Chapman, who was awarded the Medal of Honor, the Air Force controller, and his helicopter was shot down. He lost a whole bunch of guys. He couldn't do anything about it. And so just because he had that shared experience, because he'd gone through it, him saying that resonated in a way that, that my wife didn't, that many other. And I can only imagine, what it is for you, even though the horrible, horrible tragedy. And I'd have to imagine you would give anything to have your daughter back again. But you can speak into the lives of parents who have had that horrible, horrible thing in a way that I can, or that people who haven't lost a child can. Yeah, for sure.
Words mean something different when they're coming from a person who feels somewhat of something of what you feel.
100%.
So I really feel like I didn't expect necessarily to get off on this, but I really feel like it's important to explain to people who you are and what you bring to the table. Vince Flynn didn't serve. He couldn't. He wanted to be a Marine. But he served in a different way for the rest of us, telling the stories of people. And I think that you've picked up the mantle beautifully in this latest offering. We can't give away any of the plot twists, darn it, and killed off characters, or are there killed off? Oops, excuse me, microphone. Are killed off characters. I mean, and then we have to ask, are there any characters killed off? But what do you want us to know about denied access?
Yeah, so I think the first thing always is I was a fan of Vince Flynn way before I became a writer, and certainly long before I ever knew I'd have the opportunity to write in the universe that he created. And so for any Vince Flynn fan, there's always been this hanging Chad, as it was, this sense that Vince's work wasn't completed because he went back in time to write Mitch Rapp's origin story. And he wrote American Assassin, which was amazing, and which is up until now the only book that has been made, only one of Vince's books that was made into either a movie or a TV show. It was made into a movie. And then he wrote Kill Shot, which is the second one, where you see young Mitch Rapp transition from graduating from Stan Hurley's kind of school of hard knocks to his operational assignments. And then there was supposed to be a third book, and Vince never wrote it. And so one of the biggest things that folks have tried to reconcile is there is what appears to be Mitch Rapp's first true love after his girlfriend, Mary, perished when the Lockerbie, the Pan Am flight was blown up out of the sky over Lockerbie, Scotland, and it killed his girlfriend, his high school sweetheart and college sweetheart. And there's this girl that comes in that for the first time seems to fill her place, a girl named Greta. And we never know what happens to her, because when the first Mitch Rapp book that Vince actually wrote, that was called Transfer of Power, when it picks up, Greta's never mentioned. And so there are a whole bunch of kind of just hanging things that I thought, man, I would love for the opportunity to go back in time and tell that story. And then there are also, because Kyle, when he wrote his 9 books, he continued the series forward. And so there are characters in Kyle's last book, Code Red, who are no longer alive, but who were integral parts to Mitch Rapp's upbringing. And so Thomas Stanfield is one, who is the CIA director. Stan Hurley's another. And so as I was looking at that, I thought, man, there's always Thomas Stanfield is such this interesting guy, because Vince made him out to be the spy, right? That he was an operative in the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, I think is the acronym, the CIA's predecessor during World War II. And then he also talks about how Stan Hurley was very active in the Cold War and getting into trouble on the wrong side of the Berlin Wall and stuff. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool as part of that to be able to give little snippets of their background and to be able to answer that seminal question for Mitch Rapp fans and to be able to give
Sure.
you a deeper dive into these characters that fans love who unfortunately you can't write any news stories about now. And so that's kind of how the idea for Denied Access came about.
We found out what Stan's middle name is when Mitch took his first cigarette from Stan, at least that I was aware of anyway, besides the playing around in high school stuff. And we found out how fraught the process to become the CIA director was for Thomas Stansfield. And so I appreciated those details very much.
Yeah, it was. So the other thing that was really interesting is when you go back, and I've reread Vince's books over and over again, he was not at all concerned with leaving hanging plot lines out there. And he was, from what I understand about his writing process, he was a very organic writer. He wrote the book kind of as it came to him. And so I have to imagine that there were stuff where he just thought, he died very, very young. He was only 47, thought, hey, I'll go back and address that sometime later. And so at the end of Kill Shot, you have this incredible situation, setting Greta aside, where Mitch Rapp has gone into a hotel in France. He's killed the guy who is the runner-up to be, or the odds-on favorite to be, the director of the CIA. He's killed a French intelligence officer, and then a couple of bad guy terrorists in there at the same time, and just walks out of the hotel. And Vince just left that, and so when I was writing this book, I thought, what would be the fallout of that? And there's also, I tried to weave like a lot of actual history into it. And so you and I are old enough to remember when the Berlin Wall came down and when the Soviet Union collapsed, and we had this whole notion that, history was ending, that all the threats against humanity were going over. And what generally follows that is, first, we should cut the budget of the Defense Department, which Bill Clinton did at the time. They called it the peace dividend. And the second time being, do we even need this thing called the Central Intelligence Agency anymore? And so I kind of wanted to address that in the book, and then make it part of Thomas Stanfield's story as he's trying to win the nomination and be nominated to lead the Central Intelligence Agency.
Your preface takes us back to his old days during the World War II. I really appreciated that, and I liked the fact that you give us details and how the inhumanity in a way of that time.
Yep.
And I'm not talking about, what the Germans did to the poor Jews. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about using certain people in the furtherance of freedom. And so I really appreciated that a lot. And I also really liked the way you threw me back to having to go finally get into John le Carré novels. How much of a role did that play in your thinking?
So Denied Access is my first ever real espionage novel where, in this genre, all of us that write military or political thrillers, if you ask us, we'll say we write espionage thrillers because that's the highbrow, that's the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's the thing we aspire to. Most of us don't, because it's really, really hard. My friend David McCluskey does, and he is one of the most phenomenal writers in that genre. In fact, I'm reading his new book called The Persian now. That's just incredible. But because when you write an espionage thriller, the good ones like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, like those, there's always layers upon layers upon or even like Slow Horses and stuff now. The TV show is phenomenal. I'm reading through the book series and stuff now.
Writing it down.
And if you haven't seen it, it is incredible. Gary Oldman is
gosh.
He's the title character, and it's like it's the role of his life. But they're so complicated because the really good ones, it's almost like a whodunit where you're constantly trying to unravel the spy network and what are these connections and who does what to who. And so for this book, I knew I wanted to do it. And I knew the other thing is because Vince was predominantly a post 9/11 writer, the majority of his books, if not all of them, dealt with fundamental Islamic terrorism. And so I thought, it would be neat too to write a Cold War book that deals not so much with that goes back into like you said, the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy stuff. And so I asked David McCluskey, I'm like, hey, I'm trying to do kind of this Cold War right as the Soviet Union crumbles. And he said, well, there's this great book called The Main Enemy, which is a nonfiction book. And it was written by a journalist and a guy named Milt Beardman, I think is how you say his last name. And Milt was a CIA officer who could have been Smiley. And so he was head of the Near East Division. He went to Moscow Station when there was a period of time where the U.S. lost so many assets, so many Russian assets, and we found out later the reason is because the FBI and the CIA were both penetrated by moles, with Robert Hansen and Aldrich Ames. And each organization thought the other organization was leaking. Neither of them would look at themselves. And so the consequences of that is, over a period of time, Moscow Station, so the CIA station that runs Russian assets in Moscow, lost so many assets that they were convinced that the Russians had invented some sort of new surveillance that they didn't know about, and they were afraid to even go on the streets and meet with their assets. And so Milt Beardman actually was one of the guys who had to go over there and kind of kick him in the tail and get him motivated again to go doing spy stuff. And so I love the book, and I told McCluskey, I'm like, this is phenomenal. And McCluskey said, well, Milt actually lives in Austin, which is where I live. And he's like, would you like to meet him? And I'm like, yes, I would. And so
that's awesome.
He's in his 80s now. And he said, well, come on down to my office. And his office could have been the set of a movie. And so you see, like, there's one picture on the wall of him briefing President Reagan. There's another picture of him standing on the Freedom Bridge, like as the Soviets are pulling out of Afghanistan. And so, I got to, for an hour and a half or 2 hours, just ask him questions and try and understand what it was like to be a CIA officer running operations against the Russians, what it was like to be a CIA officer at that time, knowing potentially that your organization had a mole, but not knowing what it was or who you could trust or who you couldn't, and how it worked. And so it was just a ton of fun. And that helped me kind of structure the two competing spy rings that form Center Stage and Denied Access.
Yeah. What does denied access mean? I mean, somebody's denied access. I just don't know who.
Yeah. So in the world of publishing, you suggest titles for books, and then the publisher and marketing team settle on it. And so the correct term, the one I think I actually suggested, was denied area. And so that harkens back to operational areas like Moscow that are so heavily defended at the time that it's considered denied area assignment. And so CIA officers typically or traditionally travel overseas under diplomatic cover of some kind or another. Oftentimes they are working jobs in the embassy that are real jobs during the daytime, and then at night they go out and do their CIA jobs. Well, back in the late 80s and early 90s, the Russians had gotten so good at identifying who the CIA officers were, and later we figured out because Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen literally handed over just all of the assets that the Russians were, a good number of the actual case officers' identities, the Americans, that they kept picking up the officers as soon as they would come into Moscow. And so the CIA, and typically Moscow Station was a assignment for more experienced case officers, because there's also something called Moscow Rules, where the FSB at the time, or the Russian counterintelligence, the KGB first and later the FSB and the FSK and then FSB, were so good at their job. And it wasn't as much a gentleman thing. It was a lot of rough and tumble, where if FBI agents in Washington, D.C. would arrest a KGB officer and cuff him and rough him up a little bit, then two KGB officers or FSB would grab a CIA person in Moscow and dislocate his shoulder, as kind of pays really like Chicago rules back and forth for it. That it was normally an assignment for very experienced intelligence officers, but because all of their intelligence officers were getting burned as soon as they came into country, the CIA kind of took a gamble where they said, we're going to take these junior case officers, we're going to run this special school for them in Washington, D.C. to teach them how to ditch surveillance. We're going to try and mimic Moscow and then we're going to send them over under potentially non-traditional CIA cover things, in the hopes that those officers would be able to work in this denied area environment and be able to meet with Russian assets and those kind of things when the real officers couldn't. And to some extent, and again, Milt's book goes through all of this. The spouses were trained as well, the case officer spouses, not necessarily to do clear dead drops or do brush passes or anything but from the idea of, hey, we might take this trip as a family out to the country where the CIA officer spouse is going to go empty a dead drop or do something else. And you, as the husband or wife who isn't a CIA officer, you have to have things look normal and take the kids somewhere and do something else, so that you're potentially dragging the surveillance teams that are covering you while your CIA spouse goes off and does things. And so it was this really fascinating thing. And they had different areas of the world designated as denied areas. And then that got turned into denied access for the title.
Oh, I mean, it's a cool title.
Yeah.
But because I'm thinking of one of the last chapters where there's not a denied access there. And it was pretty awesome. That was, I very much appreciated that after reading, about what befell some of our beloved characters in this book. Well, okay. So Moscow rules are treating the other guys the way you want to be treated, kind of a thing, or did that get thrown away out?
I think it kind of got thrown away. I think so. There's two portions as I understand Moscow rules. The first being that the genteel rules of espionage don't apply, that it can get physical, get rough and tumble. You would, if you're a case officer and you got rolled up in Moscow, you'd get released, but maybe you'd get smacked around a little bit as part of it. That it wasn't just okay, you caught me now, I get a do-over tomorrow. And obviously I'm being a little bit facetious. But then the second tier of that is that when FBI agents would get rough with a KGB officer in the States that they'd found, it would be visited tenfold on CIA officers in Moscow by the KGB or something. And so it really was kind of that great line from
the
I keep thinking Goodfellas. It's not good. The Untouchables. The Untouchables. There we go. With Sean Connery, where it's like you send one of them to the hospital, we send one of yours to the morgue. It's the Chicago way. And so it was that escalation of, we're not going to, if you work in Moscow, it's big boy rules, and big boy rules mean it's not that you just get arrested and you spend the night necessarily. It means things could get physical, and often did get physical. Because that was one of the questions I asked Milt. And I'm like, how was that really? And he said, it was no joke. And he said, it was not, he said the example I gave of a CIA officer having his shoulder separated, that actually happened, that the KGB, beat him down in retaliatory for what they decided was a slight by FBI agents for somebody they were rolling up. And so it's really this, wild, wild west, this fascinating time. And it was super fun to write about.
Oh, it was, you can tell you had so much fun writing about it. And I was so inspired. I thought, oh, this is so cool. And I finally, I got to watch Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And so I saw the Gary Oldman version where he looks exactly like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary in this thing. Yeah. Have you noticed that? It's just like, is Scott Bessent, is he a spy? Oh, it's crazy. But oh my gosh, I hadn't read the book yet. Yeah. And I saw the movie, and this 2011 version of the movie, and I was absolutely beguiled. It was absolutely, for me, one of the best films I've ever seen. Just in the way it was just like, I know it was sort of ethereal in a way and alluded to certain things. And then you see the character Smiley sit down in the chair at the very end, and he's in charge. And it's like, oh man, that was awesome. And all these other people disappear. And it was, so I know that probably helped a little bit. Did your Clancy writing in that universe of books come back to help you out in these kinds of moments when you were sort of trying to plot this stuff based on the 80s?
Yeah, Somewhat, but in the other thing I try and do in my books is to stay true to what Vince did, but also lean on some of my expertise. And so, and like I said, my disclaimer: I've never been in the special operations community, but through either my military service or through the companies and stuff I worked for once I got out of the military, been fortunate enough to know a number of folks from that community. And so what I try and do with each of the books is to bring some aspect of that into the book that maybe is a little bit different, or is different from what people have seen before. And so there's and that is more Clancy-ish. There's a section in Denied Access, kind of a subplot about two folks from a particular special operations organization who are in Latvia doing some work, and then get kind of caught up into something bigger that also directly plays into what's happening in Moscow. And so that was kind of more of the Clancy-esque part of it, is more that military thriller thing. Here's this going on over
Plot
here,
over here.
Move. Yeah. And that part was fascinating too. So there was a lot from that. My little operational was fictitious, or my operation was fictitious, but the circumstances behind it were absolutely not. Whereas the Soviet Union was crumbling in Latvia, much like Ukraine and some of the other former Soviet republics have a portion of their country that are ethnic Russians, that speak Russian, that are that maybe identify more as Russian than they do that particular country, and are oftentimes viewed with suspicion by the rest of the countrymen who do not speak Russian as their primary language. And so as the Soviet Union was crumbling and the coup happened and all, right around that same area, there was kind of an uprising in Latvia that the Soviet Union, or then became Russia, tried to put down pretty brutally. And then that turned into a series of border incursions back and forth between Latvia and Russia. And so, there always is something. One of the things that Putin is famous for allegedly doing was using a series of bombings in Moscow as pretext for invading Chechnya. That he blamed it on Chechen separatists. There's a lot of thought right now that it was actually KGB officers or SVR officers or FSB, whoever it was at the time, who planted those bombs instead in order to stir up public sentiment against Chechnya and then make it easier when he decided to do the invasion. And so that kind of, those false flag operations, it's another kind of standby of espionage novels where one thing is happening, but it's really a pretext for something else and not all as it seems. And so I got to write that little segue to that little subplot, which again, leaned a little bit more into my Clancy writings.
Well, yeah, I really liked it. I enjoyed that. I thought, I'd like to see these guys again. The two guys. Maybe they will come back someday. But I liked the callback at the end of the book that you make of that, and how once again Vince Flynn saves the world, but Mitch Rapp saves the world. So false flags. I mean, does this? And the fact that you're harkening back to the 80s, 90s post-Soviet era, and we're talking about false flags, and we're talking about what Putin is capable of, and bombing people in areas, supposedly protecting others in areas that speak Russian. Are you worried about this Russia-Ukraine situation and what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also some of the same pretext he used for the invasion of Ukraine, right? There were little green men who were wandering through Ukraine, kind of setting the stand or the conditions for the follow-on invasion, the initial incursions. And so that half of Ukraine, like in the same way of the city I'm talking about in Latvia, there. So I have a friend who goes.
How do you say that city's name anyway? I could never. I was looking at it and I was like, I don't even know how to say that.
I'm the worst for that. Like when you're when you're writing the book, before they do the audio version, a lot of times the narrator will send you a list of questions and be like,
Right.
how do you say this? And I'm like, I have no idea.
I
Like
know.
I Googled it. I have no idea.
But
But I have a friend.
narrated. Yeah, I go to YouTube and any other thing I can find. You just hope and pray I find somebody who can say it.
Yeah. So one of my friends from church, she grew up in Eastern Ukraine and grew up speaking Russian as her first language and stuff. And so you had in Ukraine as well, the idea of the Ukrainian government couldn't keep the folks who were in the eastern part of Ukraine safe. And so what's Russia to do but to invade and to and protect
Make them more
their
unsafe.
ethnics? Yeah, exactly. Protect their ethnic countrymen from the ravages of Kiev and stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely, that's something that still happens. Yes, it's something that I'm worried about.
And as I said, we will have a standalone copy of our interview, and then we'll have the whole show with the rest of the items. But I would like to say, in terms of when the story isn't the story, which is what I've subtitled this episode, because as we talked about before, when the narrative is allowed to be set, when the die is cast, the hook is impaled into the cheek of the media, there's a real difficulty in getting it out and to getting the actual truth out there. For example, George Floyd, the city that, the murder, if you will, that's what they got Derek Chauvin on, but it wasn't a murder. It wasn't. He was, that was a high-tech lynching. And that was the cop who supposedly had his knee on Michael Brown's neck for 9 minutes and 54 seconds or something. That's what it started at. Then it was a little less. And then it was a little bit less. And then it wasn't actually his neck. And then it wasn't actually anything that could hurt him. They did have that hold. It was allowable. It was in all of their training manuals and everything else. And so the result was bad intel, the allowable way to switch around a narrative, take over, flood the zone with bad information. Reverend Al Sharpton and Ben Crump and Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison, still the Attorney General. Keith Ellison is I think he calls himself a communist, but moreover, he is an Islamist. And he's featured with one of Portland's worst Antifa saboteurs, Luis. Hey, Luis, how you doing? And he's holding a book, an anarchist. Actually, it's an Antifa book, and endorsing it. That's your AG of Minnesota, Keith Ellison. So between all of the screaming, yelling, fire setting, arson, beating cops up, everything else that was going on in Minnesota, then they rushed the trial of the cops. And then they had one defense attorney on behalf of the cop, Derek Chauvin. Then they railroaded the proceedings, and and then he was sent away for murder. Okay. There's a man in prison for murdering a man who was dying of an overdose on the streets of Minnesota. And he was overcome because he had heart conditions, because he took meth so much. He was on meth, fentanyl, and a whole bunch of other things. Even marijuana was in the system. If I can find, I have it in my computer and I can find it to show you the autopsy results. And the medical examiner said, if this guy had come into my lab, I would have just assumed he had died of a drug overdose, because he did. But he did. There were two other cops that came over. Hey, do you want to let him get into the position where he can breathe a little bit? But I will tell you, I'm not sure if he would have been able to breathe a little bit more, because from the very moment that the police officers saw him after he was passing bad $20 bills in Minneapolis, the very first thing he said after, "Oh, I'm surprised, and will you get out of the car?" before he started resisting arrest, which he did for more than 10 minutes, he said, "I can't breathe." He was saying, "I can't breathe," in the car before one police officer had touched him. That was the big lie. And when you don't want your city to go up in flames like Minneapolis did, and Jacob Frey kneeling to these horrible saboteurs and arsonists and blackmailers, then you got to get the right story out, the correct story. We don't, like, for example, you remember the guy who selling Lucy cigarettes, the loose cigarettes in New York and the state of New York, and I think it was Andrew Cuomo, sends the cops, "Hey, he can't sell these cigarettes. He's getting them and he's not paying the right tax on them, and you can't sell them distinctly without the seal of the New York seal." So they sent the cops out. Okay, remember that guy? He was the guy who couldn't breathe. He was the guy. And you're talking about libertarians and people in my section of the political stripe. We were outraged. Hold the phone, man. You're going to jack that dude up and put him on the ground for selling loose cigarettes? Have you people lost your collective minds? That's where I was on that. And I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And he died. He died in police custody. He had he had all kinds of issues. I'm trying to desperately think of his name. But, okay. You cannot afford to let lies take hold. The old saying, lies will go halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. So true. So true. So, now, here's the other thing that the media are trying to do, which I feel is huge disservice to the truth. Not to politics, because obviously they want the untruth to permeate through the politics, but it's BS is what it is. And it's this: when the story isn't really the story. So for 4 years, the Joe Biden administration let in millions of illegal aliens into this country. I shouldn't even say illegal aliens. Of that they were. But they were strangers. These people had not been vetted. I don't care. You cannot convince me that they were vetted. They weren't. They overwhelmed this system. They gave it over, the administration did, to NGOs to track the children. There are the new numbers for kids, 600,000 children totally lost. They found a few. 600,000. We thought it was 250, then it went up to 300. Now we find out it's 600,000 kids. And they were just letting them go with strangers. And they stopped the DNA connection. They stopped the testing, the instant testing, to determine if the people who were coming in with the kids were related to them. And they were overwhelmingly not. They let those kids just go into the ether to become sex slaves, slaves at companies, to become, maybe sometimes they match up with family somewhere. That is what Joe Biden's administration brought to this country. Okay? That's what he brought. And when you have that as your basis of comparison, policing looks pretty tough. When you're rounding people up that you've got the goods on, you've got criminal indictments against these people, but you jack them up, and there are people who are told to go and follow ICE and to get huge crowds if they can, and of course record everything, it's going to look bad. It is. You know what? What they do is really hard, police. It's really hard. So here we have Tom Homan. He was the border czar. And Tom Homan is on MSNBC, and Mika Jasinski wants to ask him, why is it that you are disappearing people? And Tom Homan has to set her straight and tell her, this is what we've been doing for decades. It just looks bad because your favorite cities won't let us do these arrests at the courthouse.
Why a lot of these people have been disappeared. You say you have data. We would love to see it. The American people should see this data.
Well, here's the rhetoric again, right? You just meant disappeared. That is a ridiculous thing to say.
Why?
Because ISIS is doing the same thing we've done for decades. But because of the last 4 years, ICE wasn't allowed to enforce the law. ICE was told to sit back, and you can't arrest an illegal alien for simply being here illegally. You got to wait till they commit a serious crime and get convicted of that crime. That's what Secretary Mayorkas' instructions were. And that's why you saw there's so much crime in this country coming from the illegal alien population, because there's no law enforcement. But we're doing the same thing right now that we did when I started back in 1984. ICE agents are enforcing the laws enacted by Congress. They're appropriated funding to enforce these laws. If you don't like what ICE is doing, then go protest Congress. However, to say we disappear people, no. We're arresting people that are in the country illegally and are public safety threat. We know exactly who we're going to arrest when we go look for them. We have a case file in front of us. We have all those facts. This is not disappearing people. This is a planned, targeted enforcement operation that we're doing. And the comments like you just made is one of the reasons why these men and women are under threat every day. Not just the men and women in ICE, but their spouses and their children. They're not disappearing people. They're enforcing the law.
Okay, so that's what Tom Homan said. And you would have thought that, I mean, it made an impact insofar as the left is furious that he is defending what they're doing. You're going and you're arresting people. You're disappearing people. You know what? How about this? Why don't you take a look at how those people got disappeared into our country for a very political reason? And then come back to me and talk to me about how wonderful this unlimited immigration is. This is the same thing. They were disappeared into our country, disappeared into certain congressional districts to up the numbers so that they would be able to change the representation in Congress. These are the things that are going on as a result of no laws, no vetting, opening the borders, and letting in complete and utter strangers. Now, who's the worst president between those two? Is the worst president the guy who just opened everything up and let people come in who were murderers and rapists and child diddlers? Is that what we want? Or the guy who's trying to kick him out? I think I've got my answer. What about you? Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. We do not take you for granted. We appreciate every single person who tunes in every week to listen and watch this program. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday, live streaming on Rumble, and then on every other podcast platform shortly thereafter when we can port it over and get it over there as soon as we can. All the shows can be found at victoriataft.com, where the censorship regime has been banned by me. Follow me on social media at these names: Victoria Taft, the Adult in the Room podcast, and the Victoria Taft Show. Send media inquiries, or any others for that matter, to victoria@victoriataft.com. And here's a big ask. Would you please subscribe, share, like, comment, recommend, and give this program a 5-star rating where you can? We really appreciate it. We do not take that for granted either. Follow my work at, you guessed it, victoriataft.com. PJ Media, I write tons over there. Flamingo Audiobooks, and of course the radio. I don't do this alone. This show is produced and engineered by Overall Media. 1A Cast is responsible for some of the Adult in the Room podcast's imaging. Logo design by Hageman Creative. The Adult in the Room podcast is produced at Flamingo Road Studios. All rights reserved.